Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Matt Gallner. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer here at the Jax Chamber. And we appreciate you joining us for another in our Working Together webinar series. Today, we've been focusing a lot on human resources issues and other issues as folks are getting back to work or working remotely. Today, we have a really important topic about cybersecurity while everyone's working remotely. So cyber risk management in a rapidly changing digital world. Doug Goodall is here. He is the managing partner of MTech's Infrastructure Services Division. He's responsible for executive leadership and management of all aspects of MTech's infrastructure service businesses, including enterprise and end user computing services, cybersecurity, and infrastructure managed services. He has over 30 years of direct experience in IT and cybersecurity, serving in multiple executive management roles for companies ranging from Silicon Valley-backed startups to Fortune 500 enterprises to venture capital firms. I know, Doug, this is something that's on a lot of our minds, and I know we're very interested to hear some of the tips you've had and kind of what you guys have seen, over the last 6 months. So, Doug, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, and thank you all for joining. It's a pleasure for MTech to be able to present and talk to you today, and we'll try to leave some time towards the end of the hour. If there's any questions that we could take, we'll be open to do that. My good friend Ashley at the Chamber has the most important job today. She's the slide changer. And so either when I pull my ear or I say next slide, she'll take care of that for us. So Ashley, we'll change the first slide if we could. In terms of an agenda, I'll be short and sweet on that. Give you a little bit of a background for those of you that don't know MTech at all, and then go straight into the discussion topic. Clearly in the past 6 months, as we know, in all areas of life, business, corporate, personal, family, governmental, globally, we've gone through a level of disruption that we've not seen in many years. We thought that 9/11 was disruptive, and it was, but nothing that had the lasting effect that right now, in fact, we're still in the midst of it and don't really see a clear path forward. So with that, it creates a opportunity for disruption of business systems. And that's really the theme of what we're going to talk about today. Give you a little bit of background about what that disruption is, how it could impact you, but equally important, since it's an area that we study and work in professionally here at MTech, give you a few thoughts and ideas of what within your institution, be it a commercial, educational, government, healthcare, what you may be looking for, what you may want to give thought to in terms of working in a more stable environment. And with that, Ashley, I'll go to the next slide, give you just a quick overview about MTech. We are a global corporation. We have about 900 employees that floats up and down around the world with our different businesses, but our global headquarters are based here in Jacksonville, Florida. So we're pleased and proud to be part of the Jacksonville community. Very pleased and actually honored to work as closely as we've had the chance to with the Jacksonville Chamber over the past year to 18 months. A wonderful organization, actually a very impactful organization. Sponsoring these seminars or webinars as they do is a great public service. So I do want to give a shout out to the Chamber team. If we can go to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what we do for a living. Simply said, and summarized at the highest level, MTech works on digital transformation. The world for the past 20, 30, 40 years has been going through a series of technology innovations, transformations, going from the old punch card days with computers and then 50-pound desktop laptops and progressing through the mobile environment and all those changes. Every time one of those waves hits, companies have to take a look at how they operate their business, and do they take advantage of these new changes, or do they stay with what's proven and true for them? The truth of the matter is, in a digital world, which is the world we now live in, you can't really stop. If you want to compete in the marketplace, if you want to be one step ahead of your competition, closer to your clients, closer to your management, to your team members, to your community, then you really do have to take advantage of all the power and techniques and tools that come from a digital world. And within that, if you look at MTech, we have a consulting service as an example. Just a few points there. We work with companies large and small in all industry sectors that have, as an example, a large Oracle deployment for their back office or their ERP systems, for their corporate management systems. And as they move through the transformation, going from a legacy data center powered environment and want to move to a more mobile or a cloud-based environment, we help them with that transformation. Our digital services is actually an advanced software development group. A couple of examples of what we do there. In Seattle, there's a little company called Zillow. And if you're familiar, if you've tried to buy a home, looked at a home, rental, purchase, acquisition, you've probably used the Zillow app. We have a team of 85 software developers that have been working with Zillow at Zillow for 10 years developing that platform. Another example in San Francisco is one of, if not one of, the world's first fully digital mobile consumer bank. It's an organization called Varo, V-A-R-O. Fascinating company that's turning the world upside down in terms of how banking in the world of finance is conducted for consumers. We've been retained to build that platform for them. It's a totally mobile, cloud-based application, and that's how you do your total banking with Varo. So 2 examples of what we do in transformation with software development. In our infrastructure group, the one that I've got the pleasure to run, again, based here in Jacksonville, but offices up through the US and Canada, we work with companies that are looking at taking their current infrastructure and again, moving that infrastructure into a more advanced digital world. Customers that we have, 2 of the largest school districts in the United States, one of which is right here in Jacksonville, Duval County Public Schools, has been a client of ours for 15 years, going on 16 years. We're in the midst right now as we speak here in our offices in Jacksonville of deploying, configuring, procuring, and deploying 55,000 laptops for DCPS in response to COVID and their decision that the best way to continue education of the students is to have a one-on-one relationship between laptops and the student. That's the type of work that we do. We also do all of the managed desktop support services at the City of Jacksonville and JEA, a large number of organizations within the community. We have a very advanced audio-visual capability, and in the past 12 months, we've deployed close to 500 audiovisual enabled classrooms, conference rooms, law firms, organizations who want to take advantage of collaborative communications with clients, employees, customers, and do that in a secure environment. So it's a very diverse set of capabilities that we have. And based upon that foundation, which is now close to a 25-year-old foundation, 3 years ago, we launched and decided that we should extend those infrastructure services to also include advanced cybersecurity services. My background the past 20 years has been in cybersecurity, so it's an area that I was quite comfortable with. And it was one that's a natural follow-on. If we're providing all of those IT infrastructure services for companies, then the next step is how do you secure them and make sure that they're functional and they could survive what's going on in the chaotic world of cybercrime. With that, we'll go to the next slide and spend some time talking specifically about MTech and cybersecurity. In a digital world, every rich feature that you can take advantage of, whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's a web application, whether it's a cloud application, every one of those digital advantages also oftentimes will create a cyber risk issue for you. And in a very simple world, which I'm going to show you in a second, where you've got the internet, the phenomenon that came into being 30 to 35 years ago. If you've got an IP address and you've got the internet, you'll connect. And the second that you're connected, you're exposed to everybody else on the internet, everybody else that can find out what your IP address is, and then take advantage of you, try to shut you down, try to disrupt operations. So the characteristics of a digital world are characteristics fraught with cyber threats and cyber risks. But another point that I want to make, those are technical challenges, and they can disrupt your world and they can cause great damage and harm to your business. On the other hand, if you don't take advantage of these digital transformations, digital moves forward, you won't be able to effectively compete in the digital world. You won't be able to effectively communicate, not only, again, with your clients and your prospects and your partners and your employees and your management, but you won't be able to as effectively grow. So my one comment that I'll make at this point, and I'll make it at the end of this presentation, cybersecurity, if managed properly, actually is a business growth enabler for your company. Because by keeping you safe and keeping you secure, you create trust with your clients and the people that are using your services and consuming your products. And with trust, you can grow. If you don't have that secure environment, you'll lose that trust. And that's where the business threat comes in. So it's a different perspective. Cybersecurity isn't all about terrible disasters and terrible things that may happen to you. Those are potentials. But if you manage it well, it's a competitive advantage. And that's why it's worth investing in and paying attention to. We can go to the next slide now. And one comment in terms of this digital world and the pace of technology. I don't know if any of you have noticed, if you have kids, like I have kids that range from college to high school to actually grade school, I learn something every new from the next digital gadget that they bring into the house. It is moving at lightning-like speed, exponential growth in terms of the number of devices that you use personally. They're now moving into the corporate world and into your consumption for, again, client communications and getting work done. They are moving at ever-increasing speeds. That also brings ever-increasing speed of danger into the network. You've got limitless connectivity. There are no boundaries. The internet knows no geographic boundary, it knows no physical boundary, it knows no geopolitical boundary. The world is attached to it. And with that comes goodness, and also with that comes some chaos and disruption. But bear that in mind as we go through this, because we're going through a particularly unique phase right now with the COVID environment that is causing chaos at the speed of light, which is creating opportunities for us to manage. Next slide, please. So I have 3 slides in a row that look very similar. The only difference is in red on the left-hand side. The digital world implications for security pre-April 2020. The world of cyber threats and cyber threat management pre-COVID. And on the right-hand side, I'll just touch on some of these because these are key items, concepts for everybody to understand. I've already mentioned the fact traditional corporate boundaries no longer exist. You got to ask the question, what's my corporate threat surface? New vernacular that you may not be comfortable with. But if you look at the world of cyber risk, every entity has a cyber profile. And within that cyber profile, it defines how they use the digital world to conduct business. And then with that, depending whether they're relying totally on cloud-based applications, or they're still using their data center applications, or they're using mobile apps, as their particular footprint evolves and solidifies, it will create points of entry and attack. That's called your threat surface. You need to understand those so you can manage them. The other thing, and this is a phenomenon that's been out there quite some time, and it's tracked by the industry trackers every year, but the time from vulnerability initiation, in other words, a little window opens up in your network that somebody can exploit, until they actually are able to exploit it, is shrinking by the hour. The bad guys in cyber have great tools. They are as well equipped financially and technology to attack you as you are to defend yourself. So once they see a weak spot, they will attack, and they'll attack quickly. Once they attack and they get inside your network, on the average in the industry globally, it takes up to 200 days for you to discover that they're in there. And the analogy for that I like to use is, if somebody was able to sneak into your house and then stay in your house in the attic or somewhere invisible to you for 200 days, how comfortable would you feel? And that's what happens. That's why when you see with these huge breaches in the news, like Marriott several years ago, where it turned out, I forget the number, 30, 40 million Marriott clients' credit card information was all stolen. The hackers got into the Marriott network and were there literally for over 2 years. And when they're inside the network, quasi-invisible, what they're doing is they're scouting around. They're looking through your network, trying to figure out where data is residing and what data is important and of interest to them and what data isn't, and who's using your network and how do they get in, and on and on and on. They'll study very carefully. And then, as I like to say, they'll detonate the grenade. And at that point in time, you know you've been hacked, but it took you that long to discover it. With all the money that's being invested to protect networks, another industry average, approximately 15% of the time, no matter how good your network is, on the average, the bad guys can get in. So it's not like the moat in the old days around the castle, and you could try to swim across the moat, but they could see you swimming. In these days, they can get in pretty quickly and get past the best defenses. You just need to realize that's the reality of the world. The other things are, in the old days, we had what they called swivel seats in the upper right-hand corner, where in the IT department, they would have somebody watching the network to see if any of this is going on. And if they see it is, they'll spin and go onto another keyboard or contact another person to step in and try to resolve it. That's too slow. Swivel suites simply will not work anymore. Exploitation, as I mentioned earlier, it's a digitally enabled business. You'll hear a lot about artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence tools to help protect your networks for you. The bad guys have AI as well, and they're using to scope out your network as quickly as you're trying to protect it. So they're well armed, and you need to be aware of that. And they're very patient and will continue to come. The cost of an exploitation is enormous, and it's going up. So I have some numbers on another slide here to give you those numbers. But if you do get breached, no matter whether you have cyber insurance or not, it's going to be disruptive, and it's going to cost a fair amount of money just to resolve it and then to mitigate and grow from there. And then lastly, in a digital world, problems require digital solutions. You can't do it strictly with human beings anymore. So pre-April, this is a snapshot of what we at MTech and lots of other cybersecurity consultants and firms deal with day in, day out with our clients. Then earlier this year, next slide, we had COVID hit. And with COVID, unique in terms of the level of disruption that it has caused, not only from a healthcare standpoint, but from a business and lifestyle operation standpoint, it's changed many, many things. One of the largest changes that have taken place is the number of companies that have decided they must, whether it's by government and healthcare standards mandates or their own personal management mandates, move employees out of the corporate office and move them into the home environment. When in the March-April timeframe, we locked down the country, businesses couldn't lock down, they had to continue to operate, but they had to do it by moving their people outside of the secure corporate environment and to working remotely from their homes. We're going to spend a lot of time through the balance of this discussion about what that impact is. One thing it did was, on the top where it says traditional corporate boundaries no longer exist, well, post-April 2020, not only did the boundaries not exist, but you couldn't see where all your endpoints were anymore. If you're the person responsible for your corporate network, keeping it safe, keeping it protected, keeping it sound, you had systems, tools, policies, and procedures in place to kind of, quote, lock it down. People could still disrupt it, but it was locked down. When everybody moves out of the corporate environment, you don't have those controls anymore. They're disjointed and disrupted. Your threat surface has geometrically become more complex because, as an example, if you had 10,000 employees and you move 9,000 of them to work from home, that's 9,000 endpoints within your controlled environment that have now moved outside, and they're still accessing your corporate environment. The time from vulnerability exploitation's just getting shorter. The exploitation, the FBI reports that cyber incidents in the 4 to 5 months since COVID and the lockdown have quadrupled. Whenever there's chaos, whenever there's disruption, the cyber criminals are watching, and they know that that disruption is going to open new opportunities for them to attack, and they will attack aggressively. And the FBI, I think, is probably the best metric, by 400% in a 3 to 4 month period that it spiked that high. And in the cost, Hiscox is an insurance carrier in this space. An incident does not necessarily mean you've been breached. It's something that's been discovered that maybe somebody's getting into your network. On the average, an incident, to be able to identify it and mitigate it and control it, costs about $200,000. You probably don't have that in your budget. And a ransomware attack will cost you much more. Now to the next slide, and we'll look at another disturbing, not necessarily disturbing, but disruptive phenomenon that's going to take place. If we can get the next slide, Ashley. There's a dramatic paradigm shift. I've been attending many of the chamber meetings over the past several months. And at one of the meetings, every time we've met, one of the questions asked was, what are your companies doing? When are they going to go back into the office to work? And in April, the majority of the people predicted that probably by July. In the May meeting, that moved out till September. In the June and July meetings, in many cases, that's now moving into January or sometime in 2021. Google actually announced 60 days ago that they're going to stay 100% remote for 100% of their employees till July of 2021. And a lot of the studies that are being done right now, Gartner did one, and talking to executives in companies of all sizes across the US and globally, they're getting feedback now that nearly half, 47% of respondents in a recent survey have said they intend to allow employees to work remotely full-time going forward. So you go from an environment where probably 90% of the companies had their employees working within a secure corporate environment to then all radically being shifted to working from home. And now, because of the uncertainty and the fact that a lot of us have adapted and adopted new work processes, they're saying, you know, it's kind of convenient working from a remote office. It's kind of productive. Our employees like that. And as we can continue to be productive and get the work done and get it done securely, maybe we shouldn't have everybody come back. So if you think within a 3 to 6 month period, how just that construct within a corporate network has shifted, radically shifted, and is now moving back, but we don't know how fast and how completely it'll move back. That's an issue in terms of your corporate security. If we can go to the next slide. I mentioned earlier that cyber risk is not just technology risk, it's business risk. So if your employees are now working from home, you have to assure that they can still access the systems that they need to access to work, even though they're no longer in the corporate office construct, whether it's one main corporate office or multiple corporate offices, but they've moved to a remote site. You've got to give them remote access. You've got to have all the productivity tools. You've also got to make sure that it's safe and secure. If it's not, if anything goes wrong, you're not only jeopardizing your business operations, you may be jeopardizing your client loyalty. Because if they found out that some of their data has been compromised while it's in your hands, you lose trust. And business is all about trust. So you need to protect not only your reputation, but your customer and client loyalty. And you've got to stay compliant. Depending upon which industry you're in, there are rules, government regulations. There's HIPAA in terms of protecting patient information. There's PCI if you're in the retail space in terms of protecting credit card information. Those are compliance laws that you can be compliant and yet still be insecure. But to be compliant, you need to do everything you can to stay secure. So you have not only your business interruptions and the other issues that are impacting you, but you always have the issue of corporate regulatory compliance. So it's a very, very complex world. And suffice it to say, since April of 2020, your security posture has probably shifted dramatically. To the next slide. So threat surfaces in the new norm. On the right-hand side of the slide, where you see the secure wide area network and you see the cloud services in the corporate data center, and they've got the little green boxes. Those are the environments typically that your corporate IT and enterprise risk management and cybersecurity management teams have been protecting for you and have built tools, processes, policies to keep them secure. All of a sudden, though, a significant portion of that population went to the left-hand side of the slide, which is they took their laptop home. They've got a home network through their telco and whoever their provider for their corporate Wi-Fi and internet services, and they're now working from there. That environment, your corporate IT people haven't really secured. So you'll see the little skull and crossbones. That's just showing that you have a threat surface now that has grown up over this COVID period. If we go to the next slide, and I'll try to go through these quickly because there's several iterations. We have decided from an MTech standpoint, that is not a transitory experience. That's an experience, again, that's probably the pendulum's going to swing halfway back. We need to be looking at what we could do as a company for ourselves on a global basis to make sure our remote workers are safe, secure, and that all the business integrity is still available to them and to our corporate environment. From that, we're now working with our clients and saying, here's some things we've learned ourselves. Here's some things you may want to look at as you're trying to work to secure your new norm, if you will. So if we go to the next slide, there are controls that you typically want to step through when you're looking at, again, corporate cyber data integrity security. The first thing you need to do, and this was pre-COVID, but it's very essentially important now during COVID and post-COVID. First thing you need to do is to assess and prioritize your critical digital assets. What we mean by that is, if all of your data now resides in your data center on your laptop, that could be your personal contact list. That could be your corporate inventory list. That could be your corporate financial transactions and treasury systems. That could be all of your client data. Depending upon your company and what industry you're in, each one of those classes of digital assets have a different risk profile. You may not be disrupted too much if someone came in and stole Doug's contact list. I'd be upset. I'd be perhaps disadvantaged briefly because I have to go find where all that went, but the company wouldn't be put at risk. So that's a digital asset that may have a very, very high risk threshold that you're not going to worry too much about. But our corporate banking information and our client database and our intellectual property, those are things we need to protect. And if they're now being accessed and manipulated from an off-premise site, we need to look hard at that. So first thing is, assess and prioritize your assets. The second one is evaluate the new norm, the remote environment, and what threat surfaces that engenders for your business. Again, it will differ from business to business to business. Not everybody is the same. You need to understand your remote workers' risk profiles. Every home network isn't the same. Every home network doesn't have the same telco provider or internet provider. So you need to understand what that mesh looks like for you. You need to take the security protocols, policies, and tools that you had in your corporate environment and figure out how to extend them to this remote environment. And do it economically, do it quickly, but also do it in a way that it's effective for the worker. And then lastly, you've got to continually watch, just like you monitor your corporate networks and always have, you now have to put something in place where you can be monitoring these remote networks, because again, they're independent of your corporate network. Next slide, please. One way to do that, and in terms of these assessments, we have found, is that not all workers are the same. So just like not all critical digital assets are the same, all of your employees are in different job functions. And within those job functions, they have different access capabilities into your corporate data. They manipulate data differently. If, as an example, I work in a law firm and I am a corporate attorney and a litigator, the client data that I have in my possession is critically important, incredibly valuable to my client and therefore to my law firm. So in that job function, I've got a security risk that is higher in terms of potential negative impact to my firm than perhaps a receptionist would have, or somebody in our back office in our HR department, or in terms of our client scheduling department. So by looking at the different job functions, you can start to create a risk profile by that job function. And we've decided to break it down into 3 groups: standard workers, secure workers, and specialized collaborative workers. And each one of those, at the highest level, have a different job duty, a different requirement for the type of data they need to access, manipulate, retain on their systems, share with others. And based on that functional requirement, you can define, if you will, a threat profile for that standard worker. The secure worker is somebody, it could be a manager, it could be somebody in your finance department, it could be a litigator, as I mentioned, at a law firm. But by their job requirements, they have a need to work with, access, retain, and manipulate more proprietary data, the threat to which has a higher negative impact on your company. So they need to have a higher level of security if they're working remotely. And then lastly, the third group is many organizations, not all, will have collaborative workers. It may be an engineering department that is doing product development, and they're now doing it remotely. And within that, they have access to all of your engineering drawings and your intellectual property and your future product plans, and they're sharing it amongst themselves. So that group needs to be secured. So from that standpoint, we think functional roles will drive different risk profiles. If we go to the next slide, from our perception is we try to work with clients and look at that and help craft solutions for it. We call it a persona-based security profile. Your persona is, I'm in the standard worker group. That doesn't diminish my importance to the company. It just means from a cyber risk profile, mine is more limited, less exposure. A secure worker profile or persona, and then a specialized collaborative worker. In a secure worker, obviously your entire executive management team, because they have access and communication requirements amongst themselves for information, as well as with clients and with investors and stakeholders. So if you can step back as we leave this and over the next few days and think through this, start looking at your company with these different personas and see if that helps you try to assess your threat profile. Next slide, please. I've got a series now of examples of each one of these. There's multiple slides for each one, and I'm not going to go through them all, but just to show you the methodology and the impact and then how we can plan and work around it. The typical concerns of a standard remote worker, number one, when they log on to the network, you want to be able to authenticate that that's really Doug Goodall coming in with Doug Goodall's password and Doug Goodall's access credentials. So user authentication is important, and you've got to have the tools, even though they're now remote, to be able to control that. Their device, their configuration. If they're on the network inside of your corporate building, you're constantly controlling the devices. You've got people that are called administrators from a technical standpoint, and they're controlling what the device looks like, what can be on the device, what comes off the device. When you're at home, you're one step removed from that control. So you want to make sure, are we still controlling Doug's laptop even though he's working from his home? The endpoint protection, antivirus, and all of the software that's sitting on your network so someone can't come after my laptop on my network. When I'm at home, well, that's not quite as strong as it was when I was in the controlled environment. Vulnerability scanning. Again, all of these are key items that you want to address for the standard remote worker. And these next two slides will show you a couple of graphics. We'll do them very quickly, actually. Here's an example of now, instead of the red icons, the skull and crossbones for the home office, you've taken what I've just described and you've gone out and tried to put some protections into that employee on their configuration in their home. Complicated by the fact that if you have 10,000 employees, that's a pretty massive job that has to be pulled off. But there are tools, there are procedures and protocols and software applications you can deploy to extend the secure corporate environment out into the home environment for the standard worker. Next slide, please. This is just on the right-hand side, you still have to provide all of those software, hardware, product tools to your employee that's working at home. You may need to add some of the solution components that are in the middle there to achieve the security that I've just described in that graphic. So, and it's not a one size fits all. That's why that assessment is the first step that you want to take at looking at this new issue. Next slide, please. In the secure worker environment, you see the list starts to get the number of little icons in the middle. There's more of them because the secure worker not only has to have everything I've just described in terms of security for the standard worker, but with the user identity, you'll probably want to take it one step further. Even though they get on the network and they have Doug Goodall's username and password, you may want to check one step further to make sure it's not somebody impersonating Doug Goodall. And so you're going to be adding capabilities for authentication, another level of authentication, just to make sure that you're safe and in control. Remember, in your home network, and I found this when I moved home back in April, we have my 9-year-old's Xbox on that, quote, secure Wi-Fi network. We had 2 or 3 other laptops for the kids in school. We had a couple of smart TVs. We had a smart refrigerator. There's a whole number of devices, non-corporate related, that are on your home network. And so even though you'll have a password to your home network, inherently that network was designed with a different level of security than your corporate environment. And you may want to take steps to help those employees in the secure worker solution group have an increased level of home network security. It may be some software, it may be a product that you attach to their network, but it would be well worth your while to explore that, because those networks, again, have passwords, but they're used by many, many people. Everybody that's in the house in terms of the family, visitors, or friends, it's not as secure nor controlled an environment than you're used to. And yet the people in that network that are coming into your environment have complete access, unless that's understood, assessed, and controlled. So the key applications they use may be different than the standard worker. So that's a persona-based example of what you want to go into and explore. Next slide. And the next 3 or 4 slides are almost duplicative. So here again, take the steps that are just described before. You may want to put an SD-WAN wireless appliance into that home network that then makes it much more secure, as I've just described. That's something that they wouldn't have in their home network at the moment. But all of that, if you can manage it and control it and do it quickly, you will have dramatically improved, not only in the interim, while people are slowly returning to work, but for those that decide to remain working remotely, this may be a permanent way of looking at your network now, and your threat surface has just expanded dramatically. Next slide, Ashley. I'll skip through these next 2 because again, you'll be able to see it. We're going to be sending this presentation out to all of you. The chamber is tomorrow. So, or if you'd like a copy of the slides, please email me and we'll get them to you. But this was just to build that case that within the 3 personas, you're going to have these issues to deal with. And if we could get to the last persona, I want to spend just a second on the specialized collaboration worker right here. In this environment, again, it may be an architectural firm. It may be a medical office that has doctors sharing information and doing joint diagnostics, but doing it from a remote facility. All types of examples where you've got collaboration, where they're using collaboration tools. Again, as we mentioned earlier, in the past 12 months, MTech, we've deployed 500 audiovisual systems throughout the city of Jacksonville to different clients. They all want to share a large display board. It may be a smart board so that they can write things on it and see it and capture it on all their individual laptops remotely. They may want to share and preserve large amounts of engineering data or technical data and share it on a very closed basis. You need a much higher level of not only network connectivity, but network controls in this environment than you would in a secure worker or a standard worker. And therefore you see quite a few additional green check marks on the left-hand side of the slide that you need to account for. Or they need to all go back into the secure centralized location to do this. That's a business decision for all of you to make. But suffice it to say, what we want to transmit to you in terms of information, you can secure that environment, and you can do it economically if it's thought well and deployed well and managed well. Next slide, Ashley. In fact, I think we can skip right by this next slide because I want to leave time at the end. There are some questions, much as I said at the beginning, the questions you should look at and answer as you start to consider remote workers and remote cybersecurity. But at the same time, you should always be asking whether everybody comes back into the corporate environment or they stay in a mixed mode, whatever the final solution, the new norm is for you. You want to continually, you don't want to believe that we've spent this money and we've secured our environment, now we can go do something else. Again, the world changes in an internet second. People are trying to attack you constantly. Anytime anything in your network changes, be it intentionally or unintentionally, it may open up a door and somebody's looking to walk through that door to disrupt your business. You need to make sure you're comfortable that you have measures in place, documented measures, and responsible people to ensure that our overall organization is secure, not only in terms of people not being able to attack us, but people working inside our networks that are using confidential data that perhaps they shouldn't. Inadvertently, it may be accidental, or somebody clicks on an email and all of a sudden you get a ransomware threat. That will continue to happen post-COVID and on infinitum into the future. You need to understand what measures do you have in place to secure the organization. Secondly, how aware are all of your employees about this environment? It's an industry standard, quite frankly, at this point in time. Every institution, at a minimum once a year, should have cybersecurity training for all of their employees. Ideally, even more frequently than that, by doing poster boards. Because again, it's very, very normal for me to get an email from someone that says, it's Ashley and Doug, I'm sending you this information. Could you send me back this contract? And it's not really Ashley. It's somebody impersonating Ashley. And I may, without thinking about it, click yes and open up that file and either infect my company or transmit inadvertently something that I shouldn't have transmitted. So employee cyber education training is an absolute essential. Back to the early assessment, always make sure you've got a constant review of all of your digital assets and those which are most critical, most valuable, most dangerous to our environment should they ever get out, most possibly will destroy our client trust if they're manipulated, and categorize your assets accordingly and then have a defense plan based on the categorization. We need to know, and we should ask our cybersecurity experts, our IT management, our enterprise risk management. Different companies have different structures for that. But how quickly will we know should somebody get through our defenses? It's a question that's an awkward question and it's an uncomfortable question to answer, but we should continually quantify that so that we understand. Again, if somebody wants to break into my house, I can have locks on every door, every window. I can have cameras up all over. If they want to get in my house, they will get in. One way or another, they'll be patient and they'll figure out a way to break into my house. It's the same way with your cyber network. If they want to get in and they want to invest the time and energy to get in, it's quite possible, almost probable, they could get in. So you constantly have to understand that. Is our internal staff armed with the tools and skills they need? Because cyber threats change daily, they change hourly. So you can't sit back and say, well, we've got 2 people dedicated to this and assume that 2 people 6 months from now can keep up with it. You may need fewer people if you get more advanced tools. So there's always a balance between that. But make that a critical judgment. Don't take anything for granted. And then finally, can you take a snapshot and say, if someone were to take a snapshot of my environment, my company right now, what would my current risk score look like if it was a report card? And on my risk scorecard, would I look very strong or would I have some weak areas that I need to go pay attention to? You'll never know that if you don't do that assessment. It's called a vulnerability assessment. There's also a quick snapshot assessment that we do as a firm for companies that takes less than a day. And it just comes back and said, we've discovered some indicators that you may have some things you need to go look at. And perhaps you'll look at them and say, no, yeah, they look like they're red, but they're really not. We understand what we're doing. But that type of constant assessment and vulnerability management, please just continually do that as a standard business practice. Just like you lock the front door to the building every night when you leave and unlock it in the morning and have somebody watching the door during the day. Next slide. This is, we've been doing a campaign with the Jacksonville Business Journal. It started about 6 weeks ago, where the MTech team, we have authored 4 articles around cyber risk management. And they're running both in the digital version of the Jacksonville Business Journal as well as the print version. The 3rd article of the 4 is going to be coming out in the next few weeks. Within that, we put together this graphic that was included in the journal, I guess in the middle of August. Not meant to intimidate and scare people, but just to, again, as clearly as we could say, your network, the blue devices in the upper right-hand corner with the big target. And the big target is what the cyber guys are looking at. Every one of those little red lines that go around that, starting with user error, are different vulnerabilities that you may have in your environment that open up doors that people can walk through and attack you. It's very hard. It's not a trivial exercise. You may have, if you're a large organization, a good, strong, knowledgeable staff with all the tools. If you're a mid-sized company, you may not have those resources. If you're a small company, most definitely you won't have those resources because that software and that hardware can be very expensive. So you have to balance what do we need versus what can we afford. Always take advantage of the fact there are organizations out there, many here in Jacksonville and across the country, that might be able to help you on that and help you affordably with good expert advice. But not meaning, again, to have you result in sleepless nights. If you look at each one of those red lines and turn your head so you can read it, you'll find that there's a lot of threats out there. And the pandemic has created so much additional chaos, and the work from home phenomenon, even more chaos. And we know it's a very troubling time. It's very troubling, forget cybersecurity, it's very troubling in terms of the health and welfare of our employees and the health and welfare of all of our clients and our customers and our partners. So we're sharing that pain with all of you. We're very proud to be here in Jacksonville. We're open and appreciative to the Chamber for inviting us in. And with that, I'll pause. And if there's any questions that you've got that have come in, I'll try to answer them. If they're beyond my capabilities, I've got an army of people here at MTech, and we'll take emails and follow up with you. And please never hesitate to reach out to us. My contact information is on this slide. And Dave, I'll turn it back to you and Ashley.
Great. Thanks, Doug. We really appreciate your time. That was a great presentation, had a lot of very, very good information for our members. We have had some questions come in. I'd like to get to a couple of them if we can right now.
Sure.
You talked about the increase in threats. Have you seen through your clients or just through folks that you've talked to, is there certain industries that are kind of more vulnerable right now, or that are more of a target for cyber attackers?
Well, yes. I'll try to. It's a tricky question, actually. All industries are more vulnerable, I would say, today, September 15th, than they were July 15th or April 15th, because of this disruption. Not only the move to work from home, but just all of the disruption that's going on in companies. And the cyber guys, again, they see that and they're taking advantage of it and they're attacking more. Having said that, some industries have been of particular interest. Sadly, the healthcare sector has been under enormous attack, specifically in the area of ransomware over the past 90 to 120 days. Ransomware is a very simple, it's like a kidnapping of your child in the old days. They'll take your child, they'll take your loved one, they'll take someone that you value highly, they'll steal them off, and then they'll ask you for money. And if you don't give them the money, you may not see that child or loved one again. In cyber, digital ransomware, they'll get into your network. Again, they may be sitting in there invisibly right now, but they'll get into your network and they'll plant some type of, I call it a grenade, a device, a piece of code that gives them the ability remotely then to push a button and erase every single piece of data you have in your entire computer network. Or typically what they'll do is not erase it, they'll encrypt it, which means you can no longer access it. In a healthcare environment, if you think of a hospital, it's not only all the computers in the hospital, but these days, the vast majority of the medical devices that are in a patient's room are attached to that same network, feeding data back so they can understand from the nurse's station what's happening to this patient, what are the signs. The bad guys noticed that, and they started attacking with passion. Small hospitals, large hospitals, hospitals in between, medical centers, and saying exactly that. You've got 12 hours to give me $500,000 in Bitcoin. If you don't, I'm disconnecting and you will not be able to reconnect all of your medical devices. A lot of hospitals had no choice but to pay the ransom. In fact, oftentimes with ransomware, whether it's a hospital or any other type of business, when you really think through it, unless I've got everything backed up that I can immediately shut down, go away, and regenerate myself, if they're going to encrypt and lock me out from my entire network and computer and all of my data files and client files, I'll probably pay I have no choice. I've got to pay the ransom. So that's a cyber threat that has been extraordinarily prevalent these days in some industry sectors. Utilities. What if they went into a utility and not only froze the assets of the computer systems, but the pumps and all of the IoT devices that are managing and delivering, whether it's power, water, you name it. Another industry that's under specific attack right now. But even once COVID is gone and we've kind of normalized back, those industry sectors, again, the world of the cyber bad guys is so large now and so well funded, they specialize in industries. So the threat's not going to go away. But the immediate answer is yes, there's been some severe spikes.
Okay. That's interesting information. Everyone, it's scary to see what some of the motives are and
It could be
where
nation
people
state.
go.
You hear all the time, well, it's the Chinese attacking us, or it's the Russians, and that's true, whether it's for political gain or whatever, and they're very sophisticated. So nation states are attacking governments, people, etc. But cyber criminals is white collar crime, highly financed, very productive, very polished, very good at what they do, and they're doing it strictly for monetary gain, not for a political aspiration or anything else. So sadly, the internet has done wonderful things for humanity and the world and business and communications. They've also opened up some risks that we never really saw or thought of before that are now with us and will stay with us as long as we're doing business in a digital world.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of us are working from home. As an employee, what can I do if I'm working from home to try and make my environment a little bit more secure?
Well, excellent question. Number one, the first thing I would do if your IT organization hasn't reached out to you, reach out to them. Send them an email and say, I'm sorry, I have moved. I've moved because you control the computer network. Here's what I have at home. If they haven't asked you yet, if they do the assessment that I talked about earlier, they'll probably be sending out some notice to every employee saying, can you tell me what kind of a network you're operating on home? Who's your carrier? What type of a router do you have? Do you have password security? And try to get a profile. If they haven't asked you that, it would be wise for you just to reach out to them and say, here's the information I have. Can you give me advice? Training. There's lots of training and material that your company or institution may already have. Do refresher courses for all of the people working at home and remind them that if there's other people on your home network, and in most cases, if you have a family, there are, then you've got to go in and say, this laptop that's in my office is dad's or mom's work laptop. This is not for you to come in when I'm not here and turn on like you do perhaps one of the other family computers. This one is a special one. Please don't come in and use it. If you have the right security on the laptop, if they tried, they wouldn't be able to. But that type of awareness within your family and your work environment remotely it's simple, it's straightforward. If you can get the awareness up 10%, your defense probably went up 50%. And then in terms of being very, very sensitive when you see emails coming in, be cautious before you click on anything, because again, that's another technique that the bad guys are doing. They'll get your email address and they'll send you something thinking, well, he'll open it at home and it won't look suspicious. Probably didn't, most users don't take the second to look at the addressee email address to see if it is a little weird. If it is, like if it should be coming from mtechinc.com and you look at it and it's coming from mtechinc.something else, don't open it. So those little practices and hygiene are very important, can help you a lot. But at the end of the day, I would check with your IT organization, your enterprise risk management, and see if they have guidance back to you for anything additional you should be doing that they've implemented.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier some of the things to do for a more secure network, like the SD-WAN wireless appliance. What have you seen in terms of IT department budgets and things like that? I mean, how have companies adapted to trying to do this? And it happened in March. Budgets were kind of wrote for the year. I mean, how have companies adapted to doing this?
It's been extraordinarily disruptive, because you're right. Not only do we have this healthcare pandemic and we have this business disruption issue that we're dealing with and trying to control, but the economy itself in most industries, I was going to say it tanked. That's probably too strong a word, but it's been disrupted. So company budgets have been frozen. Expenses have gone up. Now, on the one hand, there's far less business travel going on, so maybe that's freed up some discretionary spending. But from our perspective, throwing a lot of hardware and new software at this on a uniform basis to try to, quote, fix the problem fast is probably not the wisest approach. Do that assessment first and put the precious dollars that you have, even if they weren't budgeted, but if you're going to have to invest to protect the assets, put it where the highest risk assets are exposed first and try to lock those down, and then move to the standard worker. Not to minimize the impact and the importance of the standard worker, but companies don't have unlimited budgets to deal with this. It's a huge, huge priority. In some cases, some of the federal funding that's gone out, especially into the public sector, into the governments and the schools, they've been able to utilize some of those funds to take these steps. As I mentioned, the 50-some thousand laptops that DCPS is deploying right now, there was some federal money to assist them in doing that, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to deliver education. But it's a very, very serious business issue, and every company is going to have different priorities and budgets. I would just say assess first and then spend second.
Okay, great. Well, Doug, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We've come to 3 o'clock, so we will be adjourning here soon. For anyone who missed part of this or has missed any of the webinars in the Forward Together webinar series, those can be found at the Jax Chamber website, which is myjaxchamber.com. There's a link to our COVID-19 business resources page, and it has recordings of all the webinars we've done so far. This is the final webinar of this series, but we're going to be doing some sporadically. We have some interest in doing one about forgiveness from the PPP funds and some other issues as they come up. We will be happy to, if anyone has any suggestions, please send them to us. We'll be happy to put another webinar together. Again, thanks to Doug Goodall with MTech, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.